Since the trade deadline is less than 3 months away, I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at some players that could be moving on. But the players on this list aren't just your typical trade bait, as they've all been on their respective clubs for quite some time and have been struggling throughout. They may be on a bad team, not living up to expectations, or both simultaneously. We'll also discuss where they could end up in the future as well. And with that, here are 4 NHL players whose teams should give up on them. Known as an agile skater with tremendous hands and playmaking abilities, Jonathan Drouin began to really showcase his talents while playing in the QMJHL, and after 2 100-point-plus seasons in the league, Drouin was later drafted 3rd overall by Tampa in 2013. After returning for one more season of junior hockey, Drouin made his NHL debut against Edmonton in October of 2014. After not moving up in the lineup like he would have hoped in Tampa, Drouin requested a trade in November of 2015. Over a year later, in the offseason of 2017, the Lightning finally pulled the trigger, sending Drouin to Quebec and Mikhail Sergachev down south in exchange. When you have the chance to get your hands on a player of Jonathan's talent at a young age, it's very important, GM Mark Burch said. The opportunity probably hasn't been available to me in 5 years. Plus, he's a kid from here, so for me, it was a decision I had to make. Well, years later, looking back, I think it's safe to say that Drouin hasn't exactly panned out as Habs fans would have hoped. After being pretty productive for his first 2 seasons in Montreal, Drouin began to struggle mightily. He also battled injuries off and on, and even took some time away from the team for personal reasons, admitting that he was struggling with anxiety and sleeping problems. Ever since the 2018-19 campaign, Drouin hasn't been able to reach the 25-point threshold. Closest the forward has been was during the 2019-2020 season, in which he notched 23 points after 44 games played. Even then, however, his shooting percentage was rather troubling, as it was below 3% at 2.6. Currently, following 25 games played on the season, Drouin is still looking for his first goal. With 8 assists to his name thus far, Drouin's ice time has unfortunately dwindled down along with his point totals. As far as his contract is concerned, Drouin will be available as a rental this deadline. Even though he does have a modified no-trade clause, it's only going to prevent him from being dealt to 3 teams of his choice. Obviously, a potential suitor would most likely be a team that's looking to go on a cup run, unlike Drouin's current club that's rebuilding. A few teams that could be looking for some forward depth are the Nashville Predators, New Jersey Devils, and New York Islanders. Most likely, GM Kent Hughes will be looking for draft picks primarily, but will have to find a team that has the space needed to add Drouin's contract to the books. Drafted 7th overall in the 2015 NHL entry draft, Ivan Provorov showed much potential coming in. Since the days of Chris Pronger on the blue line were long gone, Flyers were hoping that Provorov could be the next #1 guy on the back end. For a while, Provorov proved to be effective at both ends of the ice and was a valuable piece for Philly when it came to special teams. Even though Provorov is and has been a certified blocking machine as a Flyer, the defenseman has struggled mightily his whole career with turnovers. Last season, for example, even though he did total 31 points in 79 games played, Provorov had an egregious 84 giveaways. Stacking Provorov up to his peers, he ranked 8th for having the most turnovers league-wide and 5th amongst all defensemen. To take it a step further, career-wise, after 6 NHL seasons, not including this one, he had 102 takeaways and 472 giveaways, and that's easily a 1-to-4 ratio. Since he's had several defensive partners and plenty of time to develop on the back end, if Provorov was theoretically traded, it would not only free up around $6.75 million extra to work with on the cap, but also would tighten things up. Elliot Friedman recently echoed this speculation on his 32 Thoughts podcast. I think he's frustrated, and I think the Flyers are a bit frustrated with just the way everything has gone down. Now, I think there is an understanding here that it might be time, the insider said. Right now, considering he wouldn't be a rental, Provorov would be harder to move, knowing that he's not a UFA until 2025. Even though there hasn't been any teams recently linked to him, what we do know is that when the Winnipeg Jets were trying to trade Patrick Laine, GM Kevin Cheveldayoff inquired about the price for the defenseman's services. Since most NHL fans by this point are aware of Vancouver's misfortune so far this season, we're not going to go into great detail. But to sum it up, GM Patrick Allvin is going to likely cut his losses here and try to shake things up. With Bo Horvat still unsigned, it's very possible that we'll be seeing some big moves coming out of BC prior to the deadline. But another name that's been creeping up into the headlines here lately is Minnesota native Brock Boeser. Boeser, whose 3-year deal kicked in this season, is costing the Nucks currently $6.65 million each season. Elliot Friedman recently last month said that the Canucks only have one untouchable that they're unwilling to trade, and that's Elias Pettersson. Based on that information, we have to surmise that Allvin will at least be getting some offers on Boeser in the coming months. With 8 goals on the season thus far, the 4-time 20-goal scorer could be a difference maker if he was playing for a contender. Interestingly here, recently, the prospect of Boeser being traded to his home state has become a hot topic. Knowing that Vancouver has been on the hunt for a right-shot D-man for a while now, could Minnesota offer the Canucks what they're looking for? Also, according to Michael Russo of The Athletic, the Wild are in search of a top 6 forward. Since the departure of Kevin Fiala, GM Billy Guerin has been looking for the right replacement. Matt Dumba, who costs nearly the same as Boeser to keep on the books at $6 million against the cap, has a modified no-trade clause, meaning that, in his case, he'd be able to submit a 10-team no-trade list, according to Cap Friendly. Knowing that Guerin does prefer hometown players, the potential for him to inquire about Boeser's services seems pretty high considering. There's no hiding it. The Edmonton Oilers lately have been a mess. After losing their last 4 out of 5 games, the Oil have been struggling to remain competitive, and the standings reflect just that. If we're going by points percentage, since they've played more games than some teams, Edmonton wouldn't make the playoffs today if they commenced hypothetically. And while this may sound dramatic, when you have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on your team, it's not at all. Therefore, in an attempt to remedy the situation, GM Ken Holland could look to trade a player that hasn't worked out in Edmonton. Drafted 4th overall by Edmonton, Jesse Puljujarvi was expected to be a core piece for the Oil during the McDavid era. However, looking back today, it's fair to say that the forward has yet to live up to the hype. After having a career high of 36 points in 65 games played last campaign, Puljujarvi has struggled immensely so far in this current one. With 3 points in his last 19 games played, his ice time along with his trade value have been plummeting. According to an article from The Athletic, Holland is at the point with his player where he'd be willing to retain some of Puljujarvi's cap hit in order to make a trade. The Bison King, as he's known, is a pending UFA that's only owed $3 million total for this season. Also, according to the same article I'll reference below, one team that could take on his cap hit easily is the Anaheim Ducks. Along with the ability to absorb his contract, the Ducks also have shown interest in Puljujarvi's services going back to last season. Last month, interestingly, GM Pat Verbeek was spotted in Xcel Energy Center while the Oilers were taking on the Wild. Another interesting possibility could be the Carolina Hurricanes. Reuniting Puljujarvi with his previous line mate in World Juniors and Sebastian Aho could help revitalize his career. GM Don Waddell would have to work it into the cap, but the destination makes sense on the surface. In conclusion, it'll be very interesting to keep an eye on each player and their specific situations up until the deadline. We'll also be taking a look at some more players that could potentially be moved to new teams very shortly on the channel. If you'd like to support me, you can do so by joining my Patreon. I have various plans and perks available, and if a monthly membership isn't your thing, you can also give me a super thanks and/or buy me a coffee. Information for those methods of support will be below. Shoutouts will be given following each and every donation. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.